Many, like Democrat Congressman Don Bayer, have questioned that. He tweeted, so far he, the president, has spent one of every 4 days of his first term golfing and 2 to 3 months at Mar-a-Lago. How credible do you find that excuse coming from this president?
Not credible at all. In fact, it speaks to me of what he sets as his priorities. On a national holiday dedicated to honoring veterans, I can understand the president is busy, but as we've seen, he certainly takes a lot of time off to do the things he wants to do, vacationing and golfing. Now, I'm not knocking him for that, but on a day that's dedicated to veterans, you would think that he would at least dedicate a certain amount of time to honoring those veterans when Arlington Cemetery is literally a 10-minute drive away from the White House.
Yeah, especially when you consider how much this president has publicly declared his overwhelming support for the troops like this.
There's nobody that loves the military like I do. I love the military.
I don't think anybody's been more with the military than I have.
Well, it's interesting, the Military Times polled 900 readers and found that while support for the president remains relatively high, almost 44%, that approval rating has slowly been eroding since 2016. But that seems almost a negligible decline in the context of the past year or so and everything that's happened. Why is the military so supportive of the commander-in-chief? Why do they remain, I guess, so loyal to a commander-in-chief who won't go to places like Iraq and Afghanistan because he doesn't support the wars those soldiers have been sent to fight?
Well, when you look at that military.com survey, there are some challenges within there. There are differences between the lower ranks and the higher ranks. There has certainly been a shift in terms of women in the military support for the president. And I think we're seeing some huge shifts across the board. Now, the military.com, I've said this from the beginning, that survey instrument is not very reliable, and they admit that themselves. It showed much greater support for the president during the campaign than it is showing now. And I think we're seeing the shifts because, truthfully, I hate to say it this way, but the military is getting wise to him. He likes the military when he can use it in his speeches and when he can use it for his props. But I think many people who wear the uniform or who have worn the uniform are beginning to become a little bit more wise to his ways and what he's doing with the military as part of the defender of our country versus his particular political props.
Yeah. It's been an interesting year, I guess, for the military as well as everybody else when it comes to this president. General, thank you. Good to see you.
Good to see you, John. Thank you.
The mystery will be solved in the coming hours with the release of a full report on the murder of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi. While President Trump seems to be the only person who has any doubt about what happened, sources tell CNN the CIA has already reached its own conclusion. The Saudi crown prince is responsible. Here's CNN's Alex Marquardt.
Yet again, the president raising doubts about his own intelligence agency's conclusions. Sources tell CNN the CIA now believes Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, known as MBS, personally ordered the killing of Washington Post journalist Jamal Khashoggi. But President Trump says he doubts that because of MBS's repeated denials that he played any role.
He told me that he had nothing to do with it. He told me that, I would say, maybe 5 times. At different points. So what if he's lying? As recently as a few days ago. Will anybody really know? All right. Will anybody really know?
Part of what the CIA examined was the infamous audio recording from inside the consulate when Khashoggi was murdered and dismembered. A recording the president says he doesn't want to listen to.
It's a suffering tape. It's a terrible tape. I've been fully briefed on it. There's no reason for me to hear it. In fact, I said to the people, should I? They said, you really shouldn't. There's no reason. I know everything that went on the tape.
On his way to visit the aftermath of the California wildfires over the weekend, the president offered up a likely explanation for his defense of the Crown Prince.
You know, we also have a great ally in Saudi Arabia. They give us a lot of jobs, they give us a lot of business, a lot of economic development.
Republicans in Congress are splitting from the president. Many believe there's no doubt that MBS was behind it and want to hold him to account.
I think the evidence is overwhelming that the Crown Prince was involved.
I believe from day one that 15 people, 18, whatever the number was, they don't get on 2 airplanes, go to Turkey and chop a guy up in the consulate who's a critic of the Crown Prince without the Crown Prince having known about it and sanctioned it.
And this morning, MBS's father, King Salman, spoke publicly for the first time since Khashoggi's death As the crown prince listened in the audience, the king heaped praise on him and never directly addressed the murder or mentioned Khashoggi by name. Now, the U.S. has taken some action in response to the killing of Khashoggi. They have imposed sanctions on 17 Saudis accused of being behind that horrific murder, as well as the stopping of the refueling of Saudi planes in the war in Yemen, while also calling for a ceasefire. But for many lawmakers, Democrats and Republicans alike, that's not enough. And they fear that with Trump again seeming to not believe the intelligence community, that he's not ready to go any farther. Alex Marquardt, CNN, Washington.
Scott Lucas is a professor of international politics at the University of Birmingham, as well as founder and editor of EA Worldview. He is with us now this hour from Birmingham in England. Scott, thanks for taking the time.
Good morning, John.
The only person who isn't convinced the Saudi crown prince was directly involved in Khashoggi's murder is Donald Trump. Presumably, this report will reflect the findings of the intelligence community. So if that's the case, should we then expect this president to suddenly start talking about the crown prince in terms of some guy in the Middle East he's never met and hardly knows, because he's been pretty quick to dump friends and allies in the past?
No, he's not going to dump Mohammed bin Salman, and he's not the only person who will be trying to protect the crown prince. So will Donald Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, who is, of course, this administration's point man for contacts with the Saudi monarchy. The lines are drawn here. Donald Trump and the White House spun against the CIA report when it was put out through the media this past weekend. The conclusions which the CIA has drawn, not only from its own intelligence, from intelligence of other states like Turkey, is this operation could not have gone ahead with Mohammed bin Salman. But Donald Trump's priority is, as he said there, quote, jobs and business, by which he means arms sales. He got the $110 billion in arms sales to Riyadh last year. He was celebrated in May of last year when he visited the kingdom. He doesn't want to give up that personal affection, and he doesn't want to give up what he sees as a business priority. But watch for two things, John. First, watch for the State Department and the CIA and other agencies to try to get Saudi Arabia to move towards a ceasefire in Yemen, to try to ease their blockade on fellow Gulf state Qatar, where the U.S. has a big military base. And secondly, the King Salman inside Saudi Arabia is moving to limit the crown prince's power over external matters just a bit. And that's external matters over, say, that Yemeni civil war, over other areas of foreign policy. I think that's the play right now amongst U.S. agencies. Encourage the king to contain his son rather than trying to dismiss him.
Okay, well, we'll move on to the Russia investigation now, because the president is expected to hand over his homework, his written answers to the questions from the special prosecutor. It seems that's about as far as he's willing to go. Here's White House advisor Kellyanne Conway. Listen to this.
His attorneys have, I guess, counseled him that he should submit those answers in writing, and he has. But he's not afraid to sit down. It just doesn't seem necessary. It doesn't rise to that level.
Why is it that this White House gets to decide what's necessary? How can they be calling the shots here on this?
Well, we don't know if they will get to decide, because the showdown will come if Robert Mueller's team subpoena the president for a face-to-face questioning rather than written answers. Now, Donald Trump has moved to block that by appointing Matthew Whitaker as acting attorney general, because Whitaker can veto any subpoena. But of course, there are questions raised as to whether Whitaker needs congressional approval. So we come down to the question that we've had for 18 months, and that is, if there is a showdown, will Republicans in Congress allow Donald Trump and the White House to limit the investigation? Or will they stand up and say, no, this investigation must proceed to a conclusion which is not limited or not curbed? We probably are not close to that final decision yet, because the new Congress hasn't sat. But I would suspect that when we have a Democratic House of Representatives, by the way, and we start to have pressure from the House as well as Mueller in early January, that's when we get the answer to your question.
Okay, I don't know if you remember back in 2016, it seems like such a long time ago, Hillary Clinton and her emails. I mean, this woman was vilified during the campaign because she used a private email server to send out these emails for government business. Let's go into the time machine and take a look back. Look at this.
33,000 missing emails. Think of it, 33,000.
She should never have been allowed to run for the presidency based on what she did with emails.
She deleted the emails, she has to go to jail.
Well, now there's this reporting from the Washington Post. Ivanka Trump sent hundreds of emails last year to White House aides, cabinet officials, and her assistants using a personal account, many of them in violation of federal records rules, according to people familiar with a White House examination of her correspondence. The discovery alarmed some advisors to President Trump, who feared that his daughter's practices bore similarities to the personal email use of Hillary Clinton, an issue he made a focus of his 2016 campaign. So what? Lock her up? Lock her up? Where do we go with this?
What's good to cook Hillary Clinton's goose does not apply to Ivanka Trump. That's going to be the line from the White House. They will say that Ivanka did not delete any of the emails, that none of them contain classified information. And I have to say in a partial defense here that if there is no classified information in those emails, if they are relatively benign, then I do think there is not a serious story from a security point of view, as opposed to, let's say, at least a lapse in judgment. But here's my read on this. Given the other issues around Donald Trump and his family, given the possible violation of the Constitution's Emolument Clause to benefit the Trump Organization, given the alleged tax manipulation, I emphasize alleged, by this president, given this president and his family's approach to other countries allegedly for loans for their businesses, even as they were preparing to take office, and given, of course, Donald Trump's numerous questions over his abuse of power in the White House, I think the question of Ivanka's emails, well, they're relatively small, a molehill compared to that mountain that we're facing.
What was a mountain in 2016 is now a molehill, I guess, compared to everything else that's going on in 2018. Of course, the classified information, too, is the key to all of that. Thank you so much. Great to have you with us.
Thank you, John.
Next here on CNN Newsroom, a domestic dispute turned deadly. Gunman opens fire at a hospital in Chicago. Also ahead, the rain so many have been hoping for may present a new danger to fire-ravaged California. Into the hospital. The shooter was killed during an exchange of fire with police. A police officer, a doctor, and a pharmaceutical assistant were also killed. The gunman is believed to have had a relationship with one of the victims. San Francisco, Stockton, and Sacramento were all classified as the world's most polluted cities because of the smoke and haze coming from the so-called Camp Fire in California. In less than 2 weeks, the wildfires at both ends of the state have claimed at least 82 lives, and hundreds are still missing. Rain is finally in the forecast, but that could be both a blessing and a curse. CNN's Paul Vercammon reports now from the fire zone.
Tonight, the death toll rising in the incinerated wreckage of Paradise, and there are more than 15,000 structures obliterated. The search for remains is unlike any in California history.
This is the largest search and rescue operation in California ever. I mean, we have over 500 search and rescue volunteers from all over California, and that's just unprecedented.
The number of people unaccounted for is down from more than 1,200 to under 1,000. Authorities are trying to whittle down that list as survivors are found.
This is still raw data. My objective of finding progress or moving forward over perfection, I think, is still the better course of action, even though the numbers in many cases seem quite daunting.
Those displaced in camping and area parking lots are now spreading out to shelters ahead of predicted rain.
Unfortunately, believe it or not, yes, unfortunately, we are having some rain come in.
4 to 6 inches of rain desperately needed before the fires that officials fear will now cause mudslides and debris flow.
It will pretty much diminish a lot of those flames that are taking place right now. However, it's not going to pose a hazard to the firefighters because they're back there on dirt roads, dirt trails, trying to fight this fire. Now it's going to turn into mud, which will be another hazard for them to contend with.
Still out of the devastation, more dramatic rescue stories. A bus driver, a few months on the job, shuttled 2 teachers and 22 elementary school children to safety and rescued a 3rd teacher along the way. A 5-hour odyssey through walls of flame.
There were like fires left and right. Everywhere you look, there was like smoke everywhere and people trying to get out.
It was time to go. It's much worse than we'd ever seen. So let's get the kids that are here left and let's get them out of here.
CAL FIRE estimates 80 to 90% of the homes destroyed in Paradise, California. The bus driver, the 4th grader, one of the teachers, all lost their homes. Paul Vercammon, CNN, Paradise, California.
Meteorologist Ivan Cabero is with us now for a look at the forecast. This is a cruel twist when you think about how bad these fires have been and how many people have been praying for these rains.
Yeah,
and now a whole lot of problems.
People still in tents, unfortunately, because there are not enough areas out there to get folks out. Now, we're talking about rainfall, obviously on a fire, you would think that would be a good thing, but the problem is it's going to come in too heavy, and it is going to continue for days at a time. We had this last year, John, as far as a big problem with mudflows. We have it every year, but problem is this time we had California's most destructive fire burning upwards of, look at this, as far as the hectares, with 70% containment, we're up to 61,000 hectares burned. That is the area where water is going to fall on, and I think that's going to be a huge issue. We're up to 70%, it was 65 yesterday, so they're making progress even without the rainfall. We've been talking about the air quality index. I mean, this is just going to be a mess until we get those fires extinguished. So we have very unhealthy conditions. In fact, we're at a level 4 out of 6, and that'll be the case through the next several days. All right, so humidity increasing. This is an improvement. The wind's beginning to subside. And, of course, the rain is on the way, which is going to be good in general for California. We have a drought, and we have that dry brush, so that's going to be good. The problem is this rain, watch this, it's going to fall right over where we have the fire, or where it continues to burn, I should say, across Northern California. That's one. Here comes another one, another shot of rain heading into Friday, and the model's indicating perhaps even more rain heading into early next week. Is this unusual? No. California this time of year usually gets a lot of rainfall. The problem is it's coming on top of what we've had, which is all the scarred landscape across California. Look at that, 126 millimeters. Right in Paradise. That is going to be a disaster if that takes hold, because that is going to be a problem with mud flows. Look at all the flood watches that are in effect. Obviously, as you would expect, we have 100+ millimeters of rainfall. This is what a good chunk of Northern California looks like here. So when you have water falling on this kind of terrain, what happens is the vegetation is no longer able to do its job. It can't absorb the moisture, so it kind of falls on concrete. You get enough rainfall, you're going to start getting those mud flows, which Californians are very used to. As you know, John, this is a secondary problem when you get these big fires, and I think that will be the threat beginning Wednesday, Thursday, and into Friday. Best case scenario would be some light rain. That's not going to happen. It's going to come in with some good downpours here with several millimeters of accumulation.
So it's not over yet?
Not by any stretch, no.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Well, this just into CNN. A judge has temporarily blocked President Trump's asylum ban for immigrants who enter the U.S. illegally. That presidential order was made earlier this month to stop large numbers of immigrants from a caravan crossing the border. Thousands from that caravan are now waiting at the border in Tijuana, Mexico. The U.S. Border Patrol temporarily closed the port of entry in San Diego, California. Now, the judge's restraining order will remain in effect until December 19th. Next up here on CNN Newsroom, they had a huge hit in the 90s, but now this reggae group is getting political, taking on the Trump administration's anti-immigration stance with a new protest song. In recent days, the U.S. has dramatically tightened security on the border with Mexico, in particular around the San Diego-Tijuana area, including a pre-dawn closure of the country's busiest crossing at San Ysidro on Monday. It reopened after several hours, but almost half the vehicle lanes remained closed. In recent weeks, U.S. military troops rolled out more than 12 miles of barbed wire along the border. And over the weekend, work crews reinforced another part of the border fence by covering it completely in coiled razor wire, which brought this tweet from the U.S. president. The fake news is showing old footage of people climbing over our ocean area fence. This is what it really looks like. No climbers anymore under our administration. All of these measures are intended to harden the border because Customs and Border Protection believes some of the thousands of immigrants who recently arrived in Mexico may try to force their way into the U.S. Here's part of a statement they issued on Monday. In the early morning hours, CBP officials received reports of groups of persons from the caravan gathering in the city of Tijuana for a possible attempt or attempts to rush illegally through the port of entry instead of presenting themselves as required to a CBP officer. At least one activist group says that claim is a deliberate attempt to mislead the public and demonize refugees. Many have questioned this administration's claims of just how big the threat really is from thousands of poor, desperate immigrants in those caravans, many seeking asylum from violence and political persecution, which followed widespread outrage over the administration's policy of separating parents from their children. And then there's the signature campaign promise made by candidate Trump to build a wall on the border, what critics have called a solution in search of a problem. Now, all of those concerns, all those criticisms have been put to music. A reggae rap from the band Big Mountain.
So they can round up the population with no explanation, right in front of our face.
It's a long way from their 1994 hit, which may be a little more familiar. Joining us now from Los Angeles is lead singer Keena McWhinney, and in Chicago, Dr. John Marquez, who sings on the song and is also a professor of Latin Studies at Northwestern University. Guys, thanks for coming in. Good to see you both.
So nice to be here.
Okay, Keena, let's start with you.
Thanks for having us.
It is a big leap from Baby I Love Your Way to Deportation Nation. But when you look at your background and the history of the band, it becomes pretty clear the issues on the border are pretty personal.
Yeah, we've always been artists, activists, you know, from the very beginning. Big Mountain was actually inspired to take on the name Big Mountain because of a group of Native Americans, Navajo, Diné people that were being forced to relocate from their native lands. And that was our first few shows. We're doing benefits for those folks. So we've always been conscious. That's what we believe reggae music is all about. Staying provocative and just giving the people the truth the best way we can with music.
Yeah, there have been a lot of controversies surrounding President Trump, and immigration. It started from the moment he started his campaign, and they've just kept coming. But was there one incident in particular which you felt was the moment when you needed to make this song?
Well, our second album, actually the album that had Baby I Love Your Way on it, also had a song called Border Town. And it centered around the activities that were going on back then, 1994. If you remember, that was the year that NAFTA was inducted. A big militarization of the border called Operation Gatekeeper was taking place. So we've just been very tied into the activist border community. I'm appalled every day at some of the things that President Trump is using, some of the political ploys that he uses to get his base rallied up at the expense of human beings, people that are really suffering, people that really need help. And, you know, the reason we did this song is to show solidarity with them.
Okay, so here's part of the song which specifically deals with the U.S. President Donald Trump.
I live in a deportation nation. I did my time up on the big plantation. I had my spot, but then my spot was taken. My reality shaken. Now everyone's talking, and history is watching. What will the angry man do? When is he coming for you?
And, you mentioned this, Keena, the issue of mass deportation did not start under this administration. At one point, President Obama was deporting 400,000 undocumented immigrants a year. That was the result of a policy which began under President Bill Clinton.
All Americans, not only in the states most heavily affected, but in every place in this country, are rightly disturbed by the large numbers of illegal aliens entering our country. The jobs they hold might otherwise be held by citizens or legal immigrants. The public service they use impose burdens on our taxpayers. That's why our administration has moved aggressively to secure our borders more by hiring a record number of new border guards.
So, John, to you, why was there not the same anger, the same protest when past presidents have implemented a crackdown on immigration?
I don't think that's entirely accurate. I think we've been raising awareness around border militarization and the plight of immigrants now, at least Keno and I have, for over 20 years. I think the most powerful element of the more recent art that we've produced with Deportation Nation is a critique more of American history than it is of one particular president. We've just found it a unique opportunity to raise that awareness once again. Unfortunately, we're having to do it time and time again, but there's a strong anti-Brown undercurrent to American nationalism that contradicts the heroic contributions that Mexicano and Centroamericano people have made towards the building and maintaining of this nation state. As artists, we feel that our work is to pull back the curtain on the illusion that Kino mentioned earlier, through which immigrants, specifically Mexicanos or Centroamericanos, those along the borderlands, are persecuted as an invasive species or as a parasite to the nation state, despite how much we contribute, despite the sacrifices our families have made over time. My grandfather and namesake crossed the border without proper documentation when he received a draft call to join the U.S. Army, and he joined a caravan of soldiers that stormed beaches in France to rid or free Western Europe from fascist impulse or a growing fascist threat. That's the type of American story that we're trying to tell alongside our critique of the persecution of immigrants that's ongoing now.
Here's another part of the song, and it focuses on child separation at the border, and it's done to rap by John. So listen to this.
Lock our children in cages and they will reinvent our world. Redefine what it means to be a nation. You know not what you do. The steel is making us stronger. Our radical traditions are rooted in how we live and love otherwise.
Lock our children in cages and they will reinvent our world, redefine what it means to be a nation. So, John, what you're saying is that that policy, that specific policy implemented by Donald Trump and Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General, somehow it changed what it meant to be American?
No, that's not necessarily what I meant by that. What I meant, I was referring to what I describe as a brown radical tradition. There's always been caravans of people migrating to improve their lives. There's always been caravans of people displaced and dispossessed of opportunities. What I'm referring to is the way that our communities stick together, mostly through the work of women, mostly through the work of Mexicanas or Latinas who hold our families and hold our communities together despite the persecution that we suffer, despite the threat of deportation, despite mass incarceration. What I'm trying to convey in that piece of art is a message both to our people, to our communities, to our barrios, that we will persevere through this. And out of this discrimination, out of these forms of criminalization, we grow stronger. And it is through the struggle that we grow stronger. It is through the struggle that we'll build a better community and continue to serve and set an example for what a true democracy is, which is built upon the sacrifices of hardworking people, such as our ancestors and such as those who have held down the communities that we come from.
John and Kino, thank you so much. It was great to speak with you guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, a judge described it as the most vicious crime he's ever seen. Coming up here, a Colorado man sentenced for murdering his pregnant wife and 2 young daughters.